You can talk about anything you want. I'm going to start by asking you when you came to Savannah or your ancestors came to Savannah, or what it was like growing up in the South. And some of those questions will deal with anti-Semitism or the ability to forge your way in business, being Jewish in a non-Jewish community. And then we'll ask some individual questions. And so my only question for you is, would you like me to start with one and then the other, and then together? So Ed, I'm just going to focus on you, and Jane, you're just not even going to be in the picture. Okay. So Ed, if you would do me a favor and just introduce yourself, and would you tell me when you or your family first came to Savannah, and something about where they came from?
Hi, I'm Ed Feiler, and I grew up in Savannah. My mother was born in Savannah, and her mother was born in Savannah. On both sides, all of my relatives came from Germany at various times in the 19th century. And they've always been members of Mikveh Israel congregation.
Why did they come, and what kind of businesses did they have?
There was a mass migration of Jews from Germany and the German areas in the 19th century. I have to believe that they were part of that. My mother's father was in the wholesale retail business. His son, who was my mother's brother, joined him in that business. On my father's side, everybody was lawyers. Yes, everybody were, they were all lawyers.
Do you have memories growing up and visiting the store or learning things from your family members that were in the legal profession? And how did that impact what you thought you wanted to be when you grew up?
I never went to the store because my grandfather died in 1944 when I was 9 years old. And my uncle shut down the business and became a real estate broker. As far as the legal side of it is concerned, I worked for my father in the afternoons and on Saturday. In those days, you carried papers around to be transferred. I went to various courts and just basically moved pieces of paper around. But I did have enough experience with them. My father said, "You wouldn't be a good lawyer."
What kinds of things did you observe, perhaps, from the adults, since you were very young, about the way that World War II or the establishment of the State of Israel impacted you or your family, or did it have no bearing on your growing up?
World War II affected everybody. There was everybody who was of military age either worked in a defense factory or went off to the services. There was gasoline rationing. There was a very limited amount of goods available. So, and there was no growth, no new products. All of that went into what was called the war effort. And everyone who was healthy was in the service.
Your mother was.
What kinds of things did the adults in your world, how did they participate? Were they active military?
No,
Your father was a cowboy.
now, hold on. My father was, the cutting off point was 38 years old. And at some point, very early in the war, my father passed that age, so he did not go into the military. My mother's sister's husband was in the service. He was in the South Pacific. And of course, as a young man, I was enamored of his service. When he came around, which was not very frequently, I loved to talk to him about the military. They were wonderful people.
I want to ask you about growing up at Mikveh Israel, being a young man, and what your education was like, and your favorite memory or your worst memory, the rabbis you had, the confirmation, bar mitzvah, and any experiences you had growing up through the synagogue, through the temple.
Well, the Mikveh Israel that I grew up in was a very purist Mikveh Israel. Very reformed. This basically had to do with the Eastern European versus the Western European heritage. It was still very much a part of the Jewish experience. And they made the Mikveh Israel, there was confirmation and no bar mitzvah. They didn't keep kosher. It was a purist Judaism.
Do you have a good memory?
Americanized Judaism. I won't say I had a good memory or a bad memory. It just was the way it was. And part of the parental influence on me had to do with that. My parents were big believers in the wonderful heritage of Mikveh Israel.
When I ask people about do they consider themselves religious, I hear all kinds of answers. And I ask them where those traditions that they now follow came from. Tell me a little bit about how you think your parents either verbally or subtly or just innately taught you what it meant to be a Jew.
I think my Jewish experience was much more reinforced because I was in a Jewish fraternity in college. And that's where I met, we had 100 Jewish members of our fraternity. And that's where I made Jewish friendships. That's when I went to other people's homes because I was in college in Philadelphia at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. And I'd go home with people and see how they celebrated. It was too far to come home to Savannah from there. So during most holidays, even Thanksgiving, I didn't come home. I went to somebody's home. So I found the Jewish experience much more broadening than anything I'd been used to. Also, this was still the era of segregation, and Southerners were looked down upon by Easterners, Jewish or not Jewish. That had nothing to do with it. I mean, the segregated South was still very strong. This was in the 50s. And I was chastised, you might say, by my fellow fraternity brothers, just for being a Southerner.
I find that fascinating because I've spoken to a lot of people who had the Jew store, and they talk about the relationship with the store being in black neighborhoods and having working relationships with members of their family, people who worked for them that were like family members, and it was just a factor of life. Now, many of these people never went outside Savannah or the South to see how other people dealt with these issues. Did you find that you were able to defend the life you lead in the South? Did it make you question anything about being a Southern or Southern politics? Or it was just harassment and razzing that you got, that you just figure everyone's going to pick on someone for something?
I think you also might want to think of including how the segregation between Christians and Jews, and how you grew up with that, and how that influenced you.
Well, it was clearly there. And
What was clearly there?
I mean, one of the questions that I lead this to is anti-Semitism, and I've spoken to a lot of people who say, oh, there was none, and then I ask them, were there clubs you wanted to join when you were younger, or sports teams? And then in thinking back, it was the Jewish option was the only option available. So it's kind of one big package deal, how the way that you were viewed by your fraternity brothers, and then what the memory actually is and what the reality was.
well, as far as growing up, before I went off to college, I was part of what I'm going to call the leadership group at public high school, Savannah High School. And there was no Jewish segregation at that level. However, as soon as I went up to college, that's when they learned about restricting Jews socially. I could go to any party, be in any group, until I went off to college. And I felt discriminated against, because I guess the marriage picture came into fold then. But beyond that, I felt like Savannah was a good place to raise kids. Ultimately, my objective was to come back to Savannah. I could feel the changes coming, and I felt that the values were such that the people could sustain the change. And I will say that our family, our children, get along well with each other, have the work ethic, and understand the value of resources. And I think to that degree, I've succeeded in bringing along the next generation with a combination of Eastern and Southern and Jewish and just regular human values.
That was really beautiful. I want to talk about leadership. I'm wondering if maybe, Jane, I should talk to you first, and then we'll, since a lot of Leadership Savannah and Ways and Wishes, that was just you. Okay.
He started,
So-
no, it was both of us, because we both were president of Leadership Savannah.
Savannah, but would you rather I talk to the both of you
Ben-
about that, or
Ben
let me
was there
start?
from the
So let me
beginning.
let me go ahead and I'll continue to ask you some things about business and turning the tables on any type of segregation or business difficulties with getting ahead and being Jewish. You moved back to Savannah, and how have you impacted Savannah in terms of leadership? And where did these ideas come from? When you were younger, were there some mentors that kind of gave you some of these ideas? Were there restrictions? You mentioned that there weren't too many restrictions that you saw when you were in Savannah, but did your college days where you saw that things were restricted and different, did it in any way push you maybe to think of new ways and new paradigms where Jews can fit in, or was it all business? Tell me a little bit about your business experience and what you did and how you've helped Savannah
Well,
grow.
when I moved back to Savannah, I was married to Jane, fortunately. And we took a big picture as far as community activities is concerned. And I was admitted to the first leadership seminar in 1961. But that collapsed in by 1968, because they did what they weren't supposed to do, which is take side in the mayor's election, which clearly had to do with segregation and peaceful integration on one side and dogged opposition on the other. Once that was settled, there was no more leadership seminar. But Dr. Fanning from University of Georgia took the idea and took it to, they started Leadership Atlanta and then started Leadership Georgia. And by this time, I had met Senator Nunn, who just coincidentally had been a Emory Law School classmate of my younger brother. So I got involved in political activities, and I had met Dr. Fanning, and I was admitted to the Leadership Georgia class in 1975, after he had started in 1972. And the structure of that was there were 5 weekends, and the participants and the spouses went together. So Jane and I went to the 5 weekends. I got really involved. Became a program chairman for the next year of Leadership Georgia, and also was asked by the local Chamber of Commerce leadership to restart what now is called Leadership Savannah. So I actually, together with Jane's help, actually began Leadership Savannah in 1976. And I did it all. I did the recruiting, I did the programming, I arranged the meals, I arranged the venues, I arranged the speakers, I wrote the thank you notes, I kept the bank account. And I lasted 3 years in that capacity. And it's still going on.
How did
It's-
you change it?
What was the mission of the organization? And as Jane asked, and how did your leadership move it forward?
Well, when the chamber folks asked me to restart Leadership Savannah, I said, look, you've got to have balance. You got to have blacks and whites. You got to have men and women, what I call gender balance, which there never had been before. Never had been any integration. You've got to have people who can pay and people who can't pay. Just because that's how leaders are made. And they went along, because I was doing all the work. And it is proven to be very successful because people have met other future leaders, got involved in political campaigns, nonprofit groups have sought Leadership Savannah graduates for board positions. And people all over town know people all over town because of Leadership Savannah. I'm very proud and pleased of what was accomplished.
Before I move on, I ask Jane a few questions. Coming back to Savannah, you're also coming back as an adult to the Jewish population. How did what you learned when you went away to college and then you came back, how did that impact any changes that you helped implement at Mikveh Israel and leadership in regards to your Jewish heritage?
Well, I've been very, very active in Mikveh Israel. And most of my efforts and successes, if you will, have been in that venue. I've been board member, I've been president, which they call Parnas. I've been on 2 rabbi search committees. I've been the head of 1 rabbi search committee. I've been the official photographer for the Food Fest. And I was an usher for 50 years. My uncle was the head, who never married, was the head usher, just by default, because he went. And when my brother and I were probably 10, 12 years old, we started helping him usher at our holiday services. And I did that for 50 years. My specialty was finding seats for people, because it was very crowded. Finding seats for people where there were no seats. Move over here, please. Wait till the participants stand up. And the other ushers looked to me to get that job done. So it's a full range of activities. Now, I had lunch recently with the rabbi, and his question was, forget all that you did, what about being for the husband of the first female president in 250? He thought that was a much bigger accomplishment. But I was very supportive. Jane had supported me. Jane's ideas are great. She's there all the time. And it was
This seems like a really nice segue to talk a little bit to you. And I'm going to talk to you first, and then I'll talk to the both of you again, if that's okay. Jane, you have told me this before because I've had the pleasure of interviewing you before. But would you tell me a little bit about how you came to Savannah, where your people are from, and how they made it to these shores, and what kind of upbringing that you had that taught you anything about independence, any experiences you had dealing with anti-Semitism, and anything that taught you on self-reliance.
What was the last thing?
Self-reliance. Because I'm sure you need all those qualities to do all the things you've done in your many years here.
Thank you, Carol. It's a pleasure to be with you again. I'm Jane Feiler, wife of Edwin Feiler. My maiden name was Jane Abeshouse. My father was a urological surgeon, an inventor, and an nationally known urologist. My mother was a housewife, and I had an older sister and an older brother. We grew up in what is called Reform congregation in Baltimore, and there were 3 Reform congregations in Baltimore, and they were much more traditional than classical. The rabbis wore like a bishop's hat rather than yarmulkes. And we had a cantor, and we had much more Hebrew in our services. And I went to services regularly, went to Sunday school and was confirmed. They did not have bat mitzvahs at that time. My brother was bar mitzvah. But the temple was very important to us growing up. My mother was very active in the sisterhood and worked very hard for sisterhood. And she put on shows and plays for them to raise money, and I would be in the shows and help her. So I adored our rabbi. He was a close friend of my parents, Rabbi Abe Shaw, and I think his influence was very great on me in Sunday school. In fact, I had an honor at congregation to read the opening prayer and so forth. I enjoyed learning Hebrew. They didn't learn that here in Savannah's Mikveh Israel. So, I mean, I had more of a Jewish influence. We did have Sabbath dinner every Friday night, and my father did read his bar mitzvah prayer book and read the Hebrew at the dinner table. And so I had much more of that, and I brought that to our marriage because my in-laws did not practice it at home, though they did go to synagogue, but they did not practice, in my memory, in their home. So when we got married, Ed said, "We'll do whatever you want to do." So I just carried forth like my mother did, and had seders and Hanukkah and so forth. And we've been doing that as a family ever since. So coming to Savannah, which was in 1959, we got married in 1958, which was 55 years ago. And I taught school in Annapolis, Maryland for the first year we were married, and then we moved here in 1959. So I've been here for a long time. And it was quite different for me because I did not know what anti-Semitism was in Baltimore. Baltimore had such a big Jewish population that my sister and brother each had separate social lives in the Jewish community based on age. My sister had her friends, my brother had his friends, I had my friends, my parents had their friends. All were Jewish. And we did not integrate with non-Jews, except at school. I went to a private school that was very progressive. It was first in the country. And that experience taught me how to be part of a bigger community than just a Jewish community. It was a big eye-opener to me. There were very few Jewish people in my class. There were only 19 people in our class because we had some very unusually bright people and people with difficult problems. And a headmaster, Hans Freilacher, was a leader in progressive education. He expected us to be involved in the community. We used to go into the slums of Baltimore once every few months with our gloves and blue jeans and clean up people's yards in slum areas. The people would be inside the house looking out at us, cleaning their yards, as if to say, what the heck are you doing in my yard? They never came out to help with us. We did the work. We got back to school, we would have to wash our hands with lye soap, and this was a great feeling that you were doing something right for the community. My parents were not involved in the community of Baltimore. My father was involved in the medical community and the world community, and my mother in the synagogue. So they were not involved in Baltimore City. And so this experience at Park School really influenced my outlook in being supportive to my community. So when I came here, we got involved in McFisville, and I was supportive of all the activities that Ed did, and we went regularly, and the children went to Sunday school, and the children were bar and bat mitzvah, and confirmed, and we celebrated in our home. But we didn't limit our experience to just McFisville. It was an eye-opener for me trying to get involved through the Jewish Educational Alliance. There was discrimination at that time between the Orthodox and the conservative and the Reform congregations. I felt very ostracized from the Orthodox community. I was insulted at times. I had someone from the congregation I saw at a party and had a long conversation with this Orthodox gentleman. We had a wonderful conversation. He said, "You're really not bad for a Reformed Jew." I'll never forget it as long as I live. And my children had that same effect. When Andrew started Boy Scouts at the JEA, he was criticized because he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. He felt very uncomfortable. So we joined a girl Boy Scout group for him outside of the JEA. And it was a painful experience for him. And I asked him one day why he didn't have a friendship with the Boy Scout troop people in his troop. He says, "Mom, I want to prove that I can be a good scout and a good friend before they know I'm Jewish." So you could see that these were painful experiences and hard to overcome. Very hard to overcome. I was fortunate that Ed supported me in my community activities. When he was finished being president of the revised class in '75, I started as a member, I think, the following year of that class, and worked my way up to being program director and president for a 2-year term. At that time, we had 2-year programs, not 1-year programs. And I worked very hard at it and had a wonderful group of people in the class and in the structure of putting on leadership Savannah programs. And I loved the experience. I loved the people that I met and the friends that I still have because of that. And that has led to being involved in the arts in Savannah. And my undergraduate degree was in art education. I taught art in schools and in museums and privately, and developed a reputation as an art educator. So I was able to get involved in different arts organizations and nonprofit organizations.
I'm very fascinated by the fact that you did so much of this before the women's movement took hold. I've spoken to a lot of women who said that the women's movement really didn't have that much of an impact in the South because that was not the Southern way, but you were from Baltimore. And so would you tell me a little bit about if you were involved in the women's movement, or if you noticed any impact, or your ability to go into leadership positions or to do more things because elsewhere the women's movement was gaining some national attention.
I think it was very influential. At first, it was before the women's movement that I was getting involved in different organizations, committees and volunteering, and eventually on boards and things like that. But the person that influenced me a lot about the women's movement was Helen Head. Helen and I were very, very close friends. And Helen was a progressive in the women's movement. She would go to the NOW conventions in Texas and worked with women's groups and got me involved. I got involved in that because of Helen. And Helen was very prominent. She was the first woman president of the Chamber of Commerce. And she went to school and got her accounting degree before there were a lot of women accountants. And she was a leader in the women's movement in Savannah, in my opinion. We together, I helped her organize the first Women in Management conference in Savannah. That was in the 70s, the early 70s. And she and I developed what we call a board bank of women that we dispersed to nonprofits and cultural organizations for women to be on boards. And we interviewed women and we supported women and suggested women to be involved in these kinds of things. And some women were very interested in that and some were not. A lot of Southerners were not. And it was something that I noticed when I moved here, that a lot of Southern women did activities that were solo activities, tennis, swimming, dancing. They didn't have team sports for women. So women didn't learn how to be part of a team. I grew up in Baltimore where athletics and team athletics was extremely important in my life and extremely influential in my life. And so coming to Savannah and being a team player was natural for me. It was not natural for a lot of the friends that I was making that were from Savannah. And that always shocked me. But being independent, I was fortunate that I could proceed. Helen and I started 3 women's organizations that are still in effect now. Oakthorpe Business and Women's Management, the Chatham Commerce Club, and there was another women's in business organization. And these were started because of what Helen and I did together. It was under her leadership.
Was it more difficult to be a woman in business, or a Jew in business, or a housewife in business?
Being a Jew in business, I don't think affected me. Because my business, working in the family business, as well as teaching, was not affected by that. I think being a woman in business was tough. When I went back to school at Emory and got my master's in business administration at age 40 and came back to Savannah thinking I could get a job in business, and went to see a lot of friends who were in influential positions in businesses and wanted to get a job, a management job. Well, I had 2 people say to me, "What's an MBA? And why do you think you can do this? We don't have any women in our management team." And I can name the organizations that told me that. So it was tough. It was a big eye-opener, And fortunately, I was able to start businesses and be an entrepreneur with support of Ed, and support in the community, and I was able to run some entrepreneurial projects and businesses. And so I didn't go into management into a big business. That was not available then.
I'm going to start asking you, the two of you, and either one can answer. And you can answer team type answers, or you can answer individually. I am very interested in what you told me about the JEA. It does seem that throughout its history, things almost seem to be coming full circle, and there will be changes again. My son went to a Presbyterian Boy Scout troop, and for somewhat different reasons. But your children not only had the influence of the JEA, they had Hebrew school and preparing for bar bat mitzvah. They also had the shadow of two very important Savannah business people, because the two of you individually are incredible, and together you're dynamic. If you can, as parents, what are the best things that you are hoping to give to your children? How much of it stems from your Jewish background, and how much of it just stems from who you are as leaders in the general community? And do you think it ever became apparent to you that it was difficult for them because the two of you were just so good at everything you did?
She's almost a lion. We don't look on it that way, Carol. Excuse me. I don't look on it that way. I just think I had some special opportunities. I worked hard. I studied hard. I got terrific grades. I got a naval scholarship to college, which was very sought after. But it took a lot of studying, extra tutoring, and that kind of, to get the grades that were necessary. And I just have always worked hard. I don't watch television. I read. And so I don't look upon it as setting up a challenge for the children. I just think it's the way life is lived, or the way I choose to live, the way we choose to live our life. And if it worked, fine. But we weren't challenging the world. We were just challenging each other and the children. Fortunately, our children went to very competitive colleges. They were very well trained in the local school system. And they have basically succeeded on the world stage because of their values, because of their training, because of their commitment. I don't think they're trying to match us.
Jane mentioned about difficulties with the JA because sometimes Reform Jews did not fit in. Were your memories growing up, did they involve the JA? And did you have anything more positive in terms of memories?
No, I was in the Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout. Excuse me, I am an Eagle.
You are. I was going to correct you, and I thought I should. Right, you are.
That was something my parents were very supportive of. But I didn't. There was a Boy Scout troop at the JEA. I did not join that Boy Scout troop. I joined the Boy Scout troop at the church around the corner. And that's where I got my merit badges and all the other stuff that goes with it. I just wasn't a participant. Now, part of it was geographic. The church that I was in the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts in was a 2-block bike ride away. The JEA was, at that time, was downtown. But it just was not part. The only thing I did at the JEA was to play basketball. They had a terrific basketball player. I love basketball. I am still friendly with the boys that were on that basketball team. In fact, Brian Markowitz, who was a terrific president, McFizz was the son of Neil Markowitz, who I was on that basketball team. So when the opportunities were there, I played on the basketball team. But I didn't do it, I didn't do the JE just because it was a JE. I did it when it was the best thing to do.
You also did the softball team for the JEA.
Oh, when we came back to Savannah.
Right.
Yeah, I played on the softball team. After we moved back to Savannah, I played on the softball team. And I did the volleyball. We did a volleyball and badminton every Tuesday night. I did that for years. So I never conspicuously avoided the JEA, but I did not defer to the JEA if there was something else better available.
It was good that you had the opportunity to slip into things that were better. There were many people who told me that there were no options for Jewish children that they could join. I went to an exhibit, a mosaic exhibit down in Florida, and there, to my surprise, there was a picture of the JEA basketball team. Did you travel with any of your teams when you were growing up? And do you also remember things such as dances or other social events that the JEA put out there or the temple put out specifically so you could meet other Jewish children?
We did the Temple Youth Group. I was one of the founders of the Temple Youth Group. And we did some social inner city exchanges with Charleston and
Sorry.
and then they came here. We tried to do that. I would say that was the emphasis. The youth group.
That must have been sad for you when there weren't enough young people to continue the youth group. You know, we don't have a TYG today, and it is problematic, I think, that we don't seem to have, not that Savannah was ever a huge Jewish population, but we don't seem to have the critical mass of young people to be able to stimulate activities such as Temple Youth Group. What's changed? Why haven't your children, and was it a disappointment for you when your children chose not to live in Savannah?
It was not a disappointment because we always, speaking I think for both of us, we wanted the children to have maximum opportunity. It's a big world out there. I first started traveling when I was in the Navy, and when we got married, we did a lot of travel, much of which had to do with photography, because we would travel and take photographs. How many countries have we been to?
You've been to more. I've been to 30. You've been to 40, I think.
It's an extraordinary amount to see and understand in this world. And we felt that our children should be able to maximize their exposure to the world. I mean, one of our sons, Bruce, has written 12 books. And you don't just write 12 books sitting in Savannah. 12 nonfiction books. So, and he now writes a monthly column for the New York Times. I think that's great. And I think that we wanted that to happen.
What can Savannah do? I mean, you've done so much to make this a progressive city, to improve the city. What can Savannah do to entice young people to want to stay?
Can I go back to a previous question and come back to this one? The children went to Savannah Country Day School, all three of them. Savannah Country Day had a discrimination policy. When Andrew started in kindergarten, there were 2 children that were allowed to be Jewish in that class. When it became first grade, there were 2 first grades. They were allowed 1 boy and 1 girl to be Jewish in each class. That's teaching these children a lot about the world out there, about segregation, about being a minority in a Christian world in Savannah. And I think that this permeated our social life, our integration into the community, whether it be a school community or whether it be Savannah at large. These are very mind-changing experiences. And I think, though the children were involved in the temple, and though there was no youth, I think there was a youth group when Andy was there, but I don't think there was when Bruce and Carrie were there. But Carrie joined B'nai B'rith Girls, which is not a Mikveh Israel group, but she went to a camp and she participated with them. It was very important to her and the friendships that she made there. So we made the effort to have them have balanced experiences. Back to Ed's word and balance, we lived that balance in our synagogue, in a bigger Jewish context with Carrie particularly, and also in the community. So I think that the reason that there's no youth group to today is because confirmation was extended a year. So they included 10th grade. And that prevented the youth group, which would have been 9th grade confirmation. It would have been easier to make that transition to youth group in the 9th grade than it is in the 10th grade. So that's my answer to that part of your question. As far as our children coming back to Savannah, the children have made their own opportunities, they've earned them, and we support them. Yes, it'd be nice to have them here. Yes, it would be nice to have the grandchildren here. We make an effort to get together as often as we can. And everybody will be together in August. And we support what they're doing, and they support each other. So we're at peace about that.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask that in terms of leadership or growing up Jewish in the South or experiences that you think that our traditions are here and how we can pass them on to the next generation, if I didn't ask you, is there something I didn't ask that you would like to speak to?
I can't think right now. You're very good at questioning, Carol. No, I think the one thing that stands out in Ed's experience for me that I saw when I moved back here is how he will run into non-Jewish friends that he grew up with, and they always bring up the fact that he's Jewish. By asking about somebody who is Jewish or what they're doing, it's like you have a mark right here. They can't see beyond. I was shocked at that when I moved back here.
Do you think that that is different today because Jews are more accepted, or there's more assimilation so that non-Jews have the opportunity to mix with Jewish people more? Clubs, or whether they have to or whether they're forced to or they want to, they accept Jewish members, and so it's not just occasionally you meet somebody from a different religion or a different background, and in fact there's more social interaction. Do you think that that has changed for Jewish people?
Yes, it's changing for the better. We were members of the Harmony Club, which was a reform social club, for many, many years. Ed was the past president. And eventually, more and more conservative and Orthodox members came into the Harmony Club, and more reform people were uncomfortable and dropped out. Now the Harmony Club, if it's still in existence, the last time I heard about it, was all Orthodox and conservative and no reform. So that dichotomy existed for decades. I don't think that would exist today. I think it would be improved. I think the JEA and the inclusion of Reform Jews on the board, and I was asked to be on the board at one time, and also the allocation committee. But I think that there is improvement. I'd like to think that that is going to continue and we'll be better off, though I think there is still some divisiveness.
Parting shot from each of you. What is it? What is the best bit of advice, the best memory that you have that you think is important to pass on to your children and grandchildren? Something about being Southern, something about being Jewish, something about being who you are in terms of your integrity or your name, or what do you want them to know about you?
Always do what's best for the family.
Family is our heritage. And that includes our religion, our values, our work, our play, our fun, and love.
Thank you very much. This was a very good interview.